2022 has been a tumultuous year for The Elder Scrolls Online, but what do ESO players really think about the game? I was curious to answer this question for myself because player complaints about ESO seem to be increasing, but is that really true, and does this feeling represent most players in the game or just a few? Keeping in mind that the source is just as important as the review itself, I wanted to find a more balanced approach to how players were reviewing ESO this year, and the results might actually surprise you. Before we get started, if you enjoy these type of ESO discussion videos, make sure to crush that like button. It absolutely helps out the channel. And if you're an ESO player, let me know what your review would be for the last year down in the comments section below. I wanted to start here with Steam because while this platform isn't perfect, there are definitely some better rails in place that make it much easier to find good reviews and opinions on games like ESO. And for one thing, since ESO started on PC, we have an amazing amount of historical detail when it comes to trends over the lifetime of the game itself. For example, if you look at the front page of ESO on Steam, the average player reviews look pretty impressive, with over 100,000 reviews of the game since its launch, and over 80% of those reviews being in the second to highest review category, which is very positive. Now, this is extremely high for any game on Steam, especially for an MMO which is almost 10 years old at this point. Plus, I've mentioned this in other videos, but ESO is still one of the top-selling games on the Steam platform, with over 400 weeks in the top 100 sales chart. It's currently number 18 right now, and the only game that's been in the top 100 sales longer than ESO is Counter-Strike. So that's definitely a huge positive for the game as well. But this is all face value, and what about the actual details? Well, this was really interesting to me as well because just above the all-time reviews is the recent reviews, which only includes the last 30 days of submitted reviews. Here we actually see a sizable dip in ratings, with ESO moving down a notch from very positive to only mostly positive. When you look at this in more detail, 71% of the reviews in this more recent time period were positive compared to 83% positive lifetime, which is a 12% dip. And again, this is just over the last 30 days, which is definitely a significant decrease. Expanding further into this, we can see the full lifetime graph of reviews for ESO on Steam, including both positive and negative, which is going to give us some really interesting trends as well. But first off, we can see a lot of positive on this graph with some absolutely massive spikes. The first one we see is November 2016. This is most likely due to the release of the 1 Tamriel update, which was a pretty big shift for the direction of the game. This allowed players to play with their friends in any zone and across multiple alliances, which was a big change. The next giant spike we see is April 2020, which no doubt corresponds to the release of ESO's Skyrim-themed update, the Greymoor chapter, which was very popular, but is also combined with the height of the pandemic that brought in lots of new players as well. Now from there, we do see a fairly consistent loss in players over the following 2 years, which is unfortunate, but I don't really think it's unexpected. Numbers for online games do tend to ebb and flow like this, and the numbers here are still relatively healthy, with the game still being reviewed positively for the most part, especially at the end of 2021. I think what worked here was the final Q4 updates that year, which brought in some amazing new features, free systems added to the game, things like the Armory and Set Collection, which really resonated with players. So ZeniMax, if you're listening, this is definitely what more players want to see. But I think the final interesting thing to note about this lifetime graph is that negative reviews have stayed pretty low and fairly consistent throughout. And for example, if we look at the height of the ESO population, which again is April 2020, there's only about 500 negative reviews, which when compared to this big spike of positive reviews is only about 12%. That's basically 88% positive, which is really good for any game. However, that being said, remember that last 30 days benchmark we looked at earlier? This is not nearly as good. Over those last 30 days, we actually have about the same amount of negative reviews that occurred in 2020, but compared to only about 1,000 positive reviews. If you were to look at that as a percentage, that's about 30% negative versus the lower 12% negative that ESO had back in 2020. There's a lot of reasons for that, I think. One of them probably being lack of content, as well as some, residual mistrust from Update 35, as well as all the bugs that ended up popping up in Update 36. So again, while there is an increase here, a substantial increase in negative reviews, especially during the last month of November. This is just 1 month over 10 years, and I think it's very easy at this point for ESO to turn this around with more positive changes in 2023. But we still need to answer the main question of this video, which is, what are ESO players saying about the game this year? I want to dive in further to player feedback, so I also am pulling up Steam reviews during this last 30 days. As we saw, there's a good mix of positive as well as negative reviews, so let's check out what the feedback here says. I'll start on the positive side with a review from the user named Daggerfall. He has over 5,000 hours played in the game, and he says he really enjoys playing it. Thanks to the developers, the game receives updates 3 to 4 times per year, though he does say some players note that might be too often. This includes new territories, new storylines, new dungeons and items, and there are not many MMORPGs that can boost such support even 8 years after release. He mentions questing as one of the main features of ESO, with lots of different and interesting NPCs, the unique dungeons, and if you prefer PvP, you can visit Battlegrounds, Imperial City, and Cyrodiil. So he says there's definitely something interesting for yourself, and he says if you like MMORPGs, you should definitely try this one. For him, it's a 10 out of 10. Here's another user with nearly 3,000 played hours on ESO, and they say, I've only been playing this game for less than 1 year. That's a lot of play time in a year, but I've only just scratched the surface of Tamriel. Even though it's supposed to be an MMO, I have been playing solo and can still explore and do things all over the map. So I think that's definitely, something that a lot of players resonate with. And then let's do one more from Sieghart, who has about 600 played hours. He says, it's very simple. If you like the Elder Scrolls games and lore, you will also like this game. It's extremely rich in story and lore about the whole TES universe. The game is not hard and is more focused on the PvE side, which will make it enjoyable to play and without rushing. Quests are very story rich. You can spend months to follow each main quest and side quest. However, he says newer expansions are poorly written, and you can see that they just rush to release it to take your money. So this is interesting. It is a positive review, but the text of the review is a little bit more mixed, talking about positives and negatives. So speaking of that, let's check out a couple of negative reviews and see what these have to say. The first one here by a user named Nendhoned, I think, who has over 7,500 hours dedicated to ESO. This is found helpful by over 400 people, and he has a very detailed review talking about some of the negatives to Elder Scrolls Online. Number one being performance. He mentions game malfunctions, core mechanics after the recent update, Alliance War and PvP combat neglected. His second point is attitude, I think, concerning feedback. He says ignoring feedback, venturing into disrespectful rancor to players through social media platforms, or that feedback is met with deaf ears. And part 2 of that is communication, which is non-existent, he says. And number 3 is a store focus, so, focusing on the crown store perhaps more than other features. He says, however, I will leave a positive, one of, if not the best communities you'll ever bond with, welcoming, supportive, and accepting. Talking about the ESO communities. Another one here with over 400 played hours. If you like overpriced microtransactions, a dev team that doesn't know where they're going, or a PvP environment where you're fighting game performance more than the person you're fighting, then ESO is the game for you. And then here's another negative review with 4,000 hours played that says, do not even consider playing this game unless you have tons of money or are content with never having any of the cool items. And then he has a list of some of the negative features here. Recent content drops, bugs, PvP, creating problems to sell the solution. That's a really interesting one. Stressing and pressuring players into spending real money, real currency gambling, and so on. So overall, really interesting, and I think a pretty balanced look at both positive and negative reviews. If we were to take a look at Steam, this is something that you can look up yourself, by the way. I actually don't play ESO through Steam. I play through the ZeniMax launcher, but anybody can log into Steam and check out these reviews and see what people are saying, as well as how the game has been trending over the years. It's definitely pretty interesting. My hope, I think, is that somebody from ZeniMax is taking a look at these, if not through this video, then at least, browsing recent reviews. We did see a very large increase of negative reviews over the last 30 days, which I think is important. Like I said earlier, it's not too late to change direction. Of course, let me know what you think down in the comments section below. What is your review of The Elder Scrolls Online? Would you recommend this to other players? Let us know why or why not. I also did a deep dive recently on some upcoming changes to the game as far as microtransactions. If you want to see more about that, you can click on that video here. If you're looking to support the channel, check out our membership over here on the right. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.